If you love stories full of fierceness and humanity in the wilderness, where blood is shed not because of war, but because of humanity, then subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any chapter of this Wild West series. Let's start right away. There are places where the sun rises only to burn the land, and the sunset falls as if burying memories in the sand. Dustrock is such a place, a land where every wind carries the smell of cracked earth, sweat, and sometimes blood. Gideon Halt lives there, a gruff, widowed man, living alone on a ranch of several hundred acres stuck between the desert and the cliffs. No one comes to visit, and he doesn't invite anyone. The only conversations he has are with his cattle, a few old horses, and the old Winchester hanging by the wooden door. That afternoon, as usual, Gideon rode his horse to check the north fence. But a mile from the stable, a scream tore through the air. Not a man's voice, not a gun or a cow's bleating, but someone's voice, desperate, pained, and suffocatingly frightened. Without thinking, he jerked the reins, spurring the old horse into the crevice where the sound had come from. His hand was already on his gun, his eyes narrowed, scanning the shadows between the cactus bushes. And then, right in the middle of the shallow crevice where the ground cracked as if raked by claws, was a sight that made him pause for half a second. Two Apache girls, one big, one small, were pinned against the cliff. A gray wolf as big as a calf was charging at them, its teeth gleaming in the fading sunlight. Blood stained the older girl's shoulder, her black hair stuck to her face from the blood and dirt. The younger girl was crying, using splinters of twigs to fight her off in vain. Gideon raised his gun. The first shot hit the wolf in the shoulder, and it roared, turning its head toward him. The second missed as it charged, fast as a whirlwind. Gideon had no time to reload. The beast lunged, and he only had time to leap aside, his hunting knife already unsheathed. The stab went from the side to the chest of the beast. It howled, clawing at Gideon's chest, tearing his shirt and flesh. But the second stab, right to his throat, ended it all. The wolf collapsed with a final hiss. Gideon fell to his knees. Blood flowed from his chest, dripping onto the sand like red ink. The sister crawled back, trying to help him up. Her eyes were not panicked, but had a strange determination, as if she had faced death many times. Though blood still flowed from her shoulder, her hands trembled as she pressed his wound with the torn flap of her shirt. Gideon winced in pain, but did not back away. "You saved us," she said hoarsely, her English hard and slow. "I will repay you, with my body." Gideon looked up, staring into eyes as black as smoldering coals. He heard no pleading or slavery in her words. There was only something close to absolute loyalty. Someone who had lost everything, and now was willing to give the rest of himself. He said nothing. He just stood up, pulled both sisters onto his horse, and drove them back to the farm. That night, Gideon sat on the steps in front of the cabin, his mouth still bitter with the taste of blood and medicine. He bandaged himself up, then left most of the remaining medicine to the two girls. Tala, the younger, slept soundly in the hayloft, and Naira, the older, sat quietly before the fireplace, the firelight illuminating her tan cheeks. No one said anything more. Gideon poured some whiskey into a tin cup and handed it to her. Naira took it, slowly sipping it, as if to make sure she was still alive. "You can go when you're better," Gideon said, as if to cut off any unnecessary ties. "I'm not holding anyone back." Naira looked up. "I know, but I owe you my life." He wanted to brush it off, but stopped, because somewhere in her eyes, he saw himself in the past, the one who stood before his wife's grave and swore he would never love anyone again. The wind blew again, colder and quieter. Dawn in Dustrock always came like a stranger unseen, unannounced. It brought no warmth, simply chasing away the darkness and revealing every crack in the earth, every unhealed wound on the skin. Gideon woke early. Though his back was still sore, he made his way to the stables to check. His body responded every time he reached out. The wolf's scratch from yesterday hadn't even begun to tear. But he was used to pain. Physical pain was more bearable than heartache. When he turned around, he saw Naira lighting the fire. Her tanned hands were nimble, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. Tala was still asleep, curled up in the straw like a kitten. "You don't have to work," Gideon said, his voice a little harsh as usual. Naira didn't look up. I don't work to pay off my debts. I work because I live here. The answer stopped him. It wasn't a thank you nor a flattery. It was a statement, straight and clear. She no longer saw herself as the one saved, but as part of this place. He was silent. Then he poured himself some cold water. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the cup. Naira noticed, but said nothing. She just pulled back her shirt, carefully wrapping the wound on his arm, just like yesterday. Her fingers were rough with age, but her movements were strangely light. "Are you studying medicine?" he asked, half joking. "No," she said. "I'm learning how to survive." The following days passed in silence, but no longer cold. Tala helped chop wood. Naira cleaned the barn, tended the horses, Gideon checked the fences and hunted. They didn't talk much. Just let the language of action speak for all the pleasantries. By Tuesday afternoon, when it had begun to drizzle, Gideon returned home with the rabbit he had hunted to find the barn swept clean, tidier than it had been when his wife was alive. Hay was tied into bundles, tools lined up. He stood on the steps, watching Naira squatting by the well, drawing water for the horse. Her back was drenched in sweat, her black hair plastered to the nape of her neck. "You don't have to do everything," he said, this time more softly. Naira looked up. Her black eyes held a challenge. "I did it because I wanted to. Not because of you. Not because of the debt." Then she went back to work, as if his words were not worth stopping her. Gideon smiled faintly. It had been a long time since someone had dared to interrupt him like that, and made him give up. That evening, he cooked a pot of beans and set out 3 bowls. "Eat with me," he said to Naira. She hesitated. Tala was asleep. The wind began to howl outside the door, knocking against the walls like an old ghost's call. She sat down. They ate in silence. No one asked about the past. No one mentioned the promise from the day before. But it was that silence, full and complete, that made the evening peaceful. Gideon didn't say anything, but he knew that this woman with her scars still unhealed had not come here just to repay a favor. She was looking for a place to start over. And maybe this farm, which had been filled with gunpowder and sadness for so many years, would become home. Not just for him, but for her. Saturday night, it rained, the unusual rain of the red earth, persistent and cold as if it were washing away someone's memory. Gideon sat by the fireplace, leaning back on an old wooden chair, swirling his glass of whiskey that had faded. The flames danced in the darkness, casting shapes on the wooden walls like ghosts from the past. Naira walked in from the stable. Her shoulders were wet, her hair was dripping, her dark eyes stared at the firelight like a lost person finding her way. Tala was sleeping soundly in the corner, covered with the down blanket Gideon had given her the day before. "You'll be cold," Gideon said, adding more wood to the fire. Naira didn't answer, just sat down opposite him, near the stone bench that had once been his wife's seat, many years ago. Silence. Only the crackling of wood, the whistling of wind through the cracks in the door, and the sound of rain hitting the wooden roof like the slow drum of fate. Then Gideon spoke, slowly, not looking directly at her. "I had a wife." Naira tilted her head slightly. Her eyes weren't surprised, just listening. 3 years ago, yellow fever killed her. That winter was colder than usual. I did everything, but it wasn't enough. She died in my arms." He paused, poured some more whiskey, and drank it all in one gulp. "After that, I didn't want to keep anything. This land, this house, the cattle, it was all just habit, a way to keep me from going mad. Sometimes I thought, maybe I should just disappear in some sandstorm." His voice didn't tremble, but his eyes were empty. For the first time, Naira saw a man who wasn't afraid of death, but was afraid of living. She moved her chair a little closer. "And you?" Gideon asked. "Why are you wandering around Dustrock? What's wrong with you too?" Naira was silent for a long moment. Then she let out a breath, a long, tired breath. "When I was 16, a man from the tribe touched me when I couldn't fight back." Gideon's grip on his glass tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "I told the clan leader. They didn't believe me. They said I was a bad omen, that I seduced him, that I tainted the tribe's spirit." The firelight reflected in her eyes, wet, but not tearful. They chased me. Tala was young, but she followed me. We went through many places, working, begging, hiding. Sometimes I think we were dead from that day, only no one wanted to bury us. Gideon didn't know what to say. His heart twisted, not with pity, but with anger. Not with Naira, but with the cruel world out there, where victims were called troublemakers, where justice lay at the hooves of horses and the barrels of guns. They sat there, too wounded, but still alive. "Do you still want to stay?" he asked, his voice low. Naira looked him straight in the eyes. "I have nowhere to go. But here, I am not called unclean. No one chases me. No one touches me against my will." Gideon nodded slightly. "Then this is your home." Naira said nothing, but her eyes softened, as if she had just put down a rock she had carried for many years. She turned to look at Tala, who was sleeping, and said, "I once said I would repay you with my body, but now, if you want, I can leave when it's morning. I don't want to make things difficult for you." Gideon stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the rain had not stopped. He turned back, his eyes serious. "I don't want anyone's body, Naira. I just want your presence, if it's voluntary." She smiled. Not the forced smile of someone in debt, but a real smile, a rare one, from someone whose trust had been stripped. That night, Naira didn't return to the stables. She slept on an old mattress by the fireplace, a few steps away from Gideon. They didn't touch each other. There was no need to say words of love, but between them, something had just sprouted. Not a bond. It's a trust. 3 days after the rain, the ground was cracked and parched again, as if it had never been watered. Gideon was adjusting the wooden fence to the west when Tala ran from the cabin, breathing heavily, her hair flying in the wind. "Someone's coming," she exclaimed, pointing down the red dirt road that led from the valley. Gideon turned, squinting against the bright sunlight. 6 riders were approaching, tall, silent, their fur cloaks flapping in the wind. The wind carried the scent of horsehide, sweat, and tension. Naira stepped out of the stable, clutching a sharpened wooden staff. Her face was pale, but her eyes were determined. Gideon had never seen her like this, like a warrior standing before the final battle. The leader was a man in his 40s, his face covered in red paint, his hair braided long, a knife tucked at his side. He stopped his horse at the fence, his eyes flicking past Gideon and then back to Naira. "I came to reclaim my people," he said, his English heavy but clear. "She has abandoned her tradition, but now her blood debt has been paid. She must return." Gideon stepped forward, his hand clutching the belt where the gun hung at his waist. "She is not property to be taken away. She is here of her own free will, and if she wants to go, I will not stop her. But if she does not, you shall not force her." The man raised his eyebrows, then sneered. "White men always think they can save everything, but she is an outcast, a filth. You think living with me will wash that away?" Before Gideon could reply, Naira stepped forward, standing upright, less than 2 meters from him. "I do not need anyone to wash me away," she said, her voice as sharp as a knife. "You threw me away like trash when I needed protection the most. You are a traitor. Then call me that. But I am not coming back. I do not belong to you anymore. Here, I am a human." The man narrowed his eyes, his murderous intent clear. "If you stay, the tribes will know. They will call you a traitor, a white man's daughter, a thing worthy of death." Naira was unfazed. "Let them call you. At least here, I am chosen." Gideon stepped to her side, placing a hand lightly on her back. No pressure, just a presence. The man glared at them both. Then he growled, "Do you think love can protect you from the law?" Gideon shrugged, his eyes cold. "I don't protect anyone, but I don't let anyone be dragged away like a piece of merchandise." The Apaches tightened their reins. The air was thick. Dry grass rustled in the wind, like a warning. Then the man said one last thing. "Remember what you said today. The tribe does not forget." They turned their horses and rode away in the red dust, leaving a heavy silence. That night, the cabin was dark. Tala went to bed early, but Naira sat by the window, the moonlight shining on her face, highlighting the faint scars on her cheekbones and neck. Gideon sat at the table, wiping his gun with a soft cloth. Not because he was afraid, but because he had lived long enough to know. Not all threats are empty threats. Naira spoke up. Are you afraid? Gideon shook his head. Not afraid of what's to come, just afraid of losing what's just begun. She turned to look at him, her eyes like deep lakes. I don't want you to get caught up. You stayed when you could have left. So did I. A moment later, she walked over, sat beside him, and placed her hand on the hand that held the gun. Thank you. Gideon squeezed her hand gently. In that moment, they were not a white man and an Apache. There was no tribe, no past, no curse that could define them. Just two people broken standing together again. The next morning, Gideon went to the stables and found Naira sweeping hay. He stood there watching her for a moment, then said, Are you sure you're ready for life here? It may never be safe. Naira looked up, sweat beading her forehead, but her eyes were bright. It is precisely because there is no peace that life is worth living. The midday sun in the Wild West was often as harsh as a sneer, and the road into Broken Mesa today was as hot as a burned palm. Gideon sat firmly in the saddle, his hand on the reins. Beside him, Naira rode his ex-wife's brown horse. Tala stayed at the ranch with an old neighbor, a retired gunfighter, but still strong enough to growl at wild wolves. Do we really have to go there? Naira asked, her voice low but not filled with fear. Yes, Gideon said. It's time they knew. I'm not a shadow on the ranch. They rode into town. Low, patchy roofs. Cigarette smoke curled from the saloon. A few children stopped playing and looked up. A stray dog ran across the road. And then, as in the old stories, all eyes turned to them. A white man rode with an Apache woman. No one spoke loudly, but whispers began to rise. From the tavern porch, from the blacksmith shop, from the second-floor window with its torn curtain. They stopped their horses in front of the general store, the only place Gideon believed he could buy flour, ammunition, and new boots for Tala. The owner, Mrs. Maribel, was already standing inside, hands on hips, her face not exactly welcoming, but not exactly contemptuous. She was a widow who lived by trade and gossip. Hello, Mr. Halt, she said, her eyes flicking to Naira. And the lady who came with her. Gideon nodded. This is Naira. She lives with me on the farm. A short pause. No one breathed. Mrs. Maribel nodded slowly. There are rumors, but I don't hear rumors. I hear them from real people. Then hear them from me, Gideon said. She's a nice person. Whoever has a problem with that should come to me, not her. Naira stood still, her face as cold as stone. But underneath, her heart was pounding. This was not the jungle. This was a place where unwritten rules could kill with a look. A slurred voice came from behind. Bringing a redskin to be your wife? There must not be enough white women here. Gideon turned around. A drunken, fat man, his face red as raw meat, stood at the door of the tavern. Gideon walked slowly, his eyes as sharp as a sharpened knife. Do you want to lose your teeth? Or are you just tired of living? He sneered. I'm just telling the truth. Redskins are born to bow, not to be wives. A punch. Quick, clean, strong. He fell to the ground like a sack of potatoes, blood flowing from his nose. The whole shop fell silent. Gideon turned to Naira, saying each word clearly. From now on, anyone who insults her will have to answer to me first. No one spoke. But the silence, strangely, was not as heavy as it had been at first. It carried a silent recognition that this man was not alone, and the woman beside him was not a commodity. On the way back, Naira said nothing for a while. She bowed her head, letting her hair cover half her face. You don't have to do that, she said as they left town. If you don't, they'll think you're weak, Gideon replied. And once they think that, they won't stop. But violence only makes them hate more. Sometimes, hate is better than contempt. Naira smiled slightly. A tired smile, but not sad. You remind me of a story. What story? Once upon a time, there was a bird whose wing was broken. It sewed it back together with a cactus thorn and flew on. Not high, not pretty, but it didn't fall again. You're that bird? Maybe. And you are the one standing below, holding out your hand to catch me if I fall. Gideon didn't reply. But as they crossed the field, the wind blowing his coat, he realized for the first time in years he wasn't embarrassed to have someone look at him. Not because he was strong, but because he had finally chosen to stand for what was right. 2 days after returning from Broken Mesa, the ranch was deceptively quiet like a calm lake before a storm. Gideon was up earlier than usual, patrolling the fence. Naira was chopping wood, while Tala was in the stable playing with the stray dog. She'd named Smokey. Everything was normal, and it was this normality that made Gideon uneasy. That night, a fire broke out in the hayloft. Gideon was the first to notice it while cleaning his gun in the kitchen. A bright flash of light swept across the window. He rushed outside, carrying a bucket of water. The flames licked the roof, black smoke billowing into the sky like an old curse rising. "Naira!" he shouted. "Tala, run!" Naira emerged from the stable, eyes blazing, a bucket of water in her hand. Tala ran after her, coughing and dragging Smokey. "It's not a coincidence," Naira said quickly, looking at the strange hoof prints dotting the dry sand. Gideon nodded, his hand never leaving the gun. "They're back." After more than half an hour of putting out the fire, the hay barn was ablaze. The smell of smoke lingered in his throat. The dry, hot night air it carried with it the feeling of something not yet finished. "They sent a warning," Gideon said, still bandaging a minor burn. "They'll be back," Naira added. "Next time, it won't be just grass." The next morning, Gideon took his axe and went out into the fields, not for a fence. He chopped down trees along the edge of the forest, choosing strong, straight, long trunks. Tala watched, her eyes worried. "What are we preparing?" she asked. "Traps," Gideon said simply. "If they come, it won't be in the dark. They'll see us waiting." That night, in the house that still smelled of burnt ashes, Naira spread a map of dust rock on the table. Her finger pointed to 3 possible routes to the farm. "They'll take the path through the ravine. Little wind, easy ambush." Gideon nodded. "Then we'll meet them there." Tala looked at the 2 adults, then said softly, "I'm not afraid, as long as we don't run away again." Naira stroked her hair, her voice softening. "We won't run. Not this time." On the 3rd night, with the moon tilted like a knife in the sky, 4 figures silently crossed the farm boundary. They were cloaked in black, their faces smeared with ash, their footsteps silent. But Gideon was there. He hid behind a rock near the ravine, where the barbed wire had been strung. When the first one stepped into the trap, a clang sounded. It startled him, and then a bullet hit the ground right in front of his boot. "Stop!" Gideon's voice thundered. They scattered like wild dogs. One opened fire. Gideon lunged to the right, returning fire. A scream rang out, then silence. Naira emerged from behind the edge of the forest, bow and arrow in hand. She shot accurately, each arrow hitting the tree trunk next to the enemy, like a warning. "I can, but I don't want to." After nearly 10 minutes of brief fighting, 3 of the 4 figures had fled. The wounded man lay there, groaning. Gideon stepped forward and tore off the man's hood. It was an Apache, young, his eyes still frightened, but not remorseful. "We were only following orders," he shouted. The chief said, "If she doesn't come back, all who hide will suffer the same fate." Naira stood there, her eyes no longer angry, only tired. "Go," she said. "Take this message. If anyone else comes, they won't come back in one piece." Gideon nodded silently, then tied the man with rope, put him on the horse, and rode off in the opposite direction of the valley. Back at the house, the 3 of them sat by the fire. No one spoke, but the atmosphere was different, no longer temporary. Determination. "Do you think this will continue?" Naira asked, her eyes on the red flames. Gideon didn't answer right away. He just threw more firewood, then said, "Maybe, but next time, we won't wait." Naira smiled. "So from now on, we're the keepers of the land." That afternoon, the sun was blazing, threatening to burn away the remnants of the dry season. Gideon was repairing the south gate when Naira approached, clutching the old leather necklace, the only thing she had from her tribe. "I'll go," she said, her eyes unblinking. Gideon put down his hammer and turned around. "Where?" "Back to the Rock Valley. Meet the Council of Elders. Tell them, You're no longer an outcast. Gideon narrowed his eyes, silent. You don't have to prove anything to them anymore. Not for them. For Tala. Because I don't want her to live in fear, hiding behind you forever. I have to face her, once and for all. Tala stood nearby, holding Smokey, listening silently. Do you want me to come with you? Gideon asked. Naira shook her head. This is my business. But I want you here, because I'm coming back. That afternoon, Naira rode away from the ranch alone. On the back of the horse, she carried a small pack, a short knife wrapped in old cloth, a necklace her father had given her when she came of age, and a hawk feather, the Apache warrior symbol. After more than 2 hours of travel, the valley of rocks appeared before her. The red rocks stood like ramparts, where she had once been home, and where she had been judged as a sinner. Darkness had begun to swallow the sun when she arrived. A campfire smoldered in the circle of elders. The chief, old Kawa, the one who had declared, "You have defiled the soul of the nation," was still sitting on the highest rock, his wolf, fur cloak draped over his shoulders. Why have you come back? His voice echoed like rocks against rocks. Naira stepped forward, took off her shawl, and stood upright in the circle of fire. To reclaim my name, not to beg for mercy. The circle stirred. Some of the young people whispered. Some of the old people bowed their heads and said nothing. I lived with the white man, Koa said. I even gave myself up to him. What is there left to keep? I don't belong to him. I belong to myself. Naira's voice was low, but each word seemed to pierce the ashes of the past. In the past, when a man humiliated me, you didn't punish him. You punished me. Because I was a woman. Because I didn't keep quiet. You forgot that the spirits of our ancestors are not in the law but in justice. Kawa gripped the armrest of the bench. You are an ominous person. Wherever you are, there is fire, there is blood. Naira pulled the knife from its wrapping and held it up. Then look carefully, she said, cutting a small incision in her hand, blood seeping out, dripping onto the ground. This blood is that of one who stood firm, did not die, did not surrender. You are a warrior, a female voice said behind her. It was an old woman. Her eyes were dim, but her voice was clear as a stream. Once, I thought you were a disgrace. But now, I see that was wrong. Another person stood up. Then another. Voices rushed. She did not kneel. She protected her sister against the world. How many of us dare to do that? Kawa stood up, his face red. But for the first time, his voice was broken. The law is the law. The law only exists when it does not kill innocent people, Naira said, her voice even. If you still think me unclean today, then let me leave again. But this time, never send someone to burn my land. Silence fell. Then Kawa sat down. His eyes were sunken and tired. I am a warrior, but I am no longer a part of this place. I don't need it, Naira said, turning away. I have another place to call home. When Naira returned to the farm, it was dawn. Tala ran out to greet her, tears streaming down her cheeks. Gideon stood on the porch, his worry turning to relief at seeing her safe. Are you okay? He asked. Naira nodded. You have nothing to hide anymore. Gideon stepped forward, squeezing her hand gently. From now on, I stand tall. From now on, she replied, I choose where I will die and live. A spring breeze blew gently through dust rock. The dark yellow grasses were turning green again. The dirt behind the house was moist and soft, the smell of new life. Tala ran barefoot through the lawn, laughing as Smokey barked after her. She was older, her voice no longer timid. It seemed that with Naira's return from the rocky valley, the shadow of the past had also melted away with the old smoke. Gideon sat on the porch, whittling the wood for the bean trellis. Naira knelt beside the bed of soil, her hands muddy but her eyes brighter than ever. I think this is good for pumpkins, she said. Yeah, just a little shade in June, Gideon replied, not looking up. Silence. But it was a warm silence, leaving no room for doubt. That evening, the three of them ate around the wooden table in the house that was no longer a place of solitude. Smokey caught a mouse today, Tala said excitedly. He growled like a wolf cub. Gideon laughed. Maybe he was a wolf. Naira looked at them both, then said softly, We're like family. Gideon was silent for a moment, then nodded. We're family. You don't need blood to call each other that. After dinner, Naira stood on the porch, looking out into the distance where the moonlight silvered the red rocks. She gently stroked her belly where a small life was growing every day. You still haven't asked me why I chose to stay, she said when Gideon came to stand beside her. Because you don't need to know the reason, Gideon replied. Just know, I chose. Naira leaned her head on his shoulder. I used to think I couldn't belong anywhere. But now, every morning when I wake up, hearing Tala's laughter, hearing you chopping wood, I feel this is home. Gideon put his arm around her shoulder, squeezing gently. And it'll be even stronger with another kid messing around. Naira laughed, her eyes sparkling. Aren't you scared? Scared? Gideon breathed. Scared that you'll leave. Scared that I'll lose something I never thought I deserved. But then I realized, fear doesn't hold anyone back. Only love and choice are strong enough. Summer brought the first rains of the season. The fields behind the house were beginning to turn emerald green. The new oak room Gideon had built was finished simple, but enough for a crib, a window to let in the morning sun, and the quiet sigh of hope. Early one morning, Tala came to Naira, handing her a sprig of purple wildflowers. Mommy, I found this in the fields, the little girl said, her hands covered in mud but her eyes sparkling. Naira held her child close, tears falling without holding back. Thank you, she whispered. Behind her, Gideon stood watching the two of them, and for the first time in years, his heart no longer felt empty. No more dead land, just a home and the people he chose to call family. I will repay you with my body is not just a promise of gratitude, but a journey to find yourself, to find a place to love, to start and to stay. True love does not come from attachment, but from a choice repeated every day. Then, from now on I'll choose every day, she said softly. Choose to stay, choose to love, choose to live. They didn't start out looking for each other. He was a rancher living among ghosts. She was a castaway, bearing scars that ran deeper than the skin. The land between them was dry and harsh, but somehow, from that unforgiving soil, something living grew. What began with blood and fire, a wolf attack, a moment of risk, became a journey neither of them had planned. Each chapter unfolded not as a love story in the traditional sense, but as a slow realization that healing doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives quietly, in shared chores, in evening silences, in unspoken glances that ask, "Are you still here?" and are answered with presence alone. Gideon didn't save Naira because he saw a woman in need. He saved her because he heard a cry no one else did, and he chose to respond. Naira didn't stay because of debt. She stayed because she was finally offered something that had been taken from her since childhood, the right to choose. Each of them had been made hard by the world. But in working together through storms, fire, and the return of old threats, they softened each other, piece by piece. He found in her a will stronger than steel. She found in him a quiet kind of steadiness that asked for nothing but gave everything. Tala, the young girl with fire in her eyes, grew up between them not as a burden, but as the living proof that broken people can still build things worth protecting. And when danger came, they didn't run. They stood their ground. Not because they weren't afraid, but because the idea of losing what they'd built was scarier than facing anything that came their way. In the end, there was no grand declaration, no wedding, no heroes on horseback. Just two people, building a room for a child they didn't expect, planting seeds in land that once only grew dust, and choosing, day after day, to stay. For those of us in the second act of life, their story holds a quiet resonance. Many of us know the weight of loss. We've lived through betrayal, through silence, through seasons where the only thing we harvested was pain. And yet, as this story reminds us, it's never too late to begin again. Not from scratch, but from honesty, from shared hurt, from choice. It's a reminder that redemption doesn't come in dramatic turns. Sometimes, it arrives in the form of someone saying, "You can stay if you want." And isn't that what we all long for, deep down? Not fireworks, not perfection, just someone who doesn't flinch at our wounds. Someone who sees the burned fields of our past and still wants to plant something with us. So, wherever you are, whether on a front porch in Arizona, in a quiet apartment in the Midwest, or resting in a recliner somewhere warm, maybe you too are carrying something old, something heavy. Maybe you're wondering if it's too late. Let this story answer you gently. It isn't. Not if you can still choose. Not if you can still open your door. Not if there's still one person you're willing to say, "You don't owe me anything, but you're welcome to stay." If this story settled somewhere in your chest, like the warmth of a fire at dusk, then take a moment. Share it. Pass it on. Let someone else know that broken things can still be beautiful. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, where hearts are mended, not magically, but honestly, consider giving the channel a like, a share, and a quiet little subscribe. Because somewhere out there, someone else is listening, and they need to know they're not alone.